The thunder of hooves echoed across the dusty plains of Abilene, Texas, as Penelope O'Brien pressed her face against the stagecoach window, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and anticipation. The year was 1878, and she was running from a past that threatened to swallow her whole, just like the vast, unforgiving landscape that stretched before her. Little did she know that the man who would change her life forever was riding toward town on that very same evening, with demons of his own nipping at his heels. The stagecoach rocked violently as it hit another rut in the road, causing Penelope to clutch her small leather bag tighter to her chest. Inside were her few remaining possessions: a locket containing a faded photograph of her parents, a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, and $23, all that remained after her hasty departure from St. Louis. "First time in Abilene, miss." The elderly gentleman seated across from her smiled kindly, his weathered face creased with the lines of someone who had seen much of life. "Yes, sir," she replied, forcing a smile despite her exhaustion. "I'm hoping to find work there. Plenty of work for a young lady like yourself, I reckon. The town's growing faster than a weed after rain." He chuckled, then added, "Name's Walter Green. Own the general store there with my wife, Martha." Penelope felt a small flicker of hope. "I'm Penelope O'Brien. I have experience as a seamstress and can keep books as well." She didn't mention that her education had been cut short when her father died, leaving debts that had nearly destroyed what remained of her family. "Well now, Miss O'Brien, you stop by the store tomorrow. Martha's been saying she needs help, and I'm too old to argue with that woman." He winked, and Penelope felt the first genuine smile cross her face in weeks. As the stagecoach rolled into Abilene just before sunset, Penelope caught her first glimpse of the frontier town. Unlike the sophisticated streets of St. Louis, Abilene was raw and untamed, a cluster of wooden buildings flanking a wide main street where cowboys, merchants, and locals mingled in the fading light. The cattle drives had transformed this once quiet settlement into a bustling hub of commerce and chaos. The driver called out, "Abilene Station. End of the line, folks." Clutching her bag and gathering her skirts, Penelope descended shakily from the coach. The journey had left her weary to her bones, but she couldn't afford to rest yet. She needed lodging for the night. "Miss O'Brien," Walter called, tipping his hat. "The Willow Creek boarding house is just down the street. Tell Ethel that Walter sent you. She's tough as rawhide but fair." "Thank you, Mr. Green. I'll see you tomorrow then." As Walter disappeared into the crowd, Penelope steeled herself and started walking. The boardwalk was alive with activity. Saloon doors swung open with bursts of piano music and raucous laughter, while shopkeepers closed up for the evening. She kept her eyes forward, ignoring the curious glances from passers-by. Just as she was about to cross the street, a commotion erupted from the far end of town. A group of riders came galloping down the main road, causing pedestrians to scatter. At their lead was a man on a powerful black stallion, his face partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. Penelope froze, watching as the riders approached. The leader suddenly pulled his horse to a stop directly in front of the largest saloon, the Lucky Spur. As he dismounted with fluid grace, she caught a glimpse of his face, strong jawline, intense eyes, and a small scar above his right eyebrow. There was something in his bearing that spoke of both danger and authority. "Who is that?" she whispered to a woman who had stopped beside her. "That's Zachary Preston," the woman replied, her tone a mixture of admiration and wariness. "Finest tracker and horseman in the county. They say he's half wild himself, raised by his pa in the mountains before coming to these parts. Doesn't say much, but when he does, folks listen." Penelope watched as Zachary Preston tied his horse to the hitching post. He moved like a man who knew his place in the world, confident, self-assured. Just as he was about to enter the saloon, he turned, and for a brief moment, his eyes met hers across the dusty street. Something electric passed between them, recognition, perhaps, though they'd never met. Or maybe it was simply the acknowledgement between two souls who knew what it meant to stand alone. He touched the brim of his hat in a slight nod, then disappeared into the saloon. Penelope released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding and continued toward the boarding house. That night, as she lay in a narrow bed in a small but clean room, she found herself thinking of those piercing eyes and wondering what had brought Zachary Preston to Abilene, and what demons he was running from. Meanwhile, in the Lucky Spur, Zachary Preston sat at a corner table, nursing a glass of whiskey. The saloon was crowded with cowboys fresh off the trail, merchants looking to make deals and locals seeking entertainment. The piano player hammered out a lively tune while a few couples danced in the small, cleared area. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon," said Sheriff Thomas Miller, sliding into the chair across from Zach. "Thought you'd be tracking those Comancheros for at least another week." Zach took a slow sip of his whiskey before answering. "Trail went cold near the Red River. Whoever they are, they know how to cover their tracks," the sheriff frowned. "That's the third raid in as many months. Folks are getting nervous, Zach. I know. I'll head out again tomorrow, see if I can pick up any sign of them further north." He paused, then added, "Saw a new face in town today. Young woman, auburn hair, looked like she just stepped off the stage." Miller nodded. "Came in on the afternoon coach from what I heard. Walter Green seems to know her." Zach didn't know why he'd mentioned her. Something about her had caught his attention, the way she held herself, perhaps, with dignity despite clearly being out of her element. Or maybe it was the haunted look in her eyes that he recognized all too well. "Well," said the sheriff, rising, "get some rest. Town's counting on you, Zach." Left alone, Zachary finished his drink and thought about the woman he'd seen. In his 10 years of riding the frontier, he'd learned to read people quickly, a skill that had saved his life more than once. And something told him that Penelope O'Brien, for he had overheard her name, as she spoke with Walter, had secrets of her own. Morning came with the golden light that only the Texas plains could produce. Penelope rose early, dressed in her best though admittedly worn blue calico dress, and pinned her hair neatly at the nape of her neck. After a simple breakfast provided by Mrs. Ethel Winters, the formidable proprietress of the boarding house, she made her way to Green's General Store. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and she was immediately enveloped by the comforting smell of coffee, leather, and dried goods. Walter Green looked up from behind the counter and beamed. "Miss O'Brien, right on time. Martha's in the back room." Martha Green was a plump, energetic woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. After a brief interview during which Penelope demonstrated her skill with needle and thread and her neat handwriting, Mrs. Green hired her on the spot. 6 days a week, Sundays off for church, Martha declared. $1.50 a day and you can take your midday meal with us. Walter says you're staying at Ethel's place. Yes, madam. Good, respectable place, important for a young woman alone. Martha eyed her shrewdly. You're running from something, aren't you, dear? Penelope tensed. I'm not in any trouble with the law, if that's what you're asking. Martha's expression softened. Not what I meant, just recognize the look. Had it myself once. Don't worry, your business is your own. Just know that Abilene can be a fresh start if you let it. Relief flooded through Penelope. Thank you, Mrs. Green. Martha, please. Now, let me show you where everything is. The day passed quickly as Penelope learned the store's inventory and helped customers. By closing time, she felt more hopeful than she had in months. With steady work, she could afford her room at the boarding house and perhaps, in time, save enough to start anew somewhere else. As Walter was locking up, the door suddenly opened, and Zachary Preston stepped inside. Penelope's heart skipped as she recognized him from the previous day. "Evening, Walter," Zach said, his voice deep and slightly rough as if he didn't use it often. "Need supplies before I head out tomorrow, tracking those raiders again." "Of course, Zach. Whatever you need." Walter turned to Penelope. "Miss O'Brien, this is Zachary Preston. Best tracker in the territory. Zach, meet Miss Penelope O'Brien, our new assistant." Zach removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Miss O'Brien." His eyes, a striking shade of blue-gray, studied her with an intensity that made her both uncomfortable and strangely exhilarated. "Mr. Preston," she acknowledged with a small nod. "Zach's heading out to track those Comancheros who have been raiding the outlying farms," Walter explained to Penelope. "Nasty business. 3 families lost everything in the last raid." "That's terrible," Penelope said, genuinely concerned. "Is there anything being done to help them?" "Town's taken up a collection," Zach replied, seeming surprised by her interest. "But what they really need is for these raids to stop." "And that's where you come in?" she asked. A shadow crossed his face. "I try. Haven't had much luck so far." Walter began gathering supplies: coffee, beans, jerky, ammunition, while Zach listed what he needed. Penelope busied herself with tidying the counter, but she couldn't help stealing glances at the tracker. There was something compelling about him, a quiet strength that seemed at odds with the wildness she sensed beneath his controlled exterior. When Walter stepped into the storeroom for more supplies, an awkward silence fell between them. "You're new to Abilene," Zach finally said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, just arrived yesterday. Family? No." Her tone made it clear she didn't wish to elaborate. He nodded, understanding her reluctance. "Abilene's growing fast, rough around the edges but decent people for the most part." "And the indecent ones?" she asked, a hint of her old spirit showing through. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Those are the ones I usually deal with." Walter returned with the remaining supplies, and Zach paid for his purchases. As he gathered the goods into his saddlebags, he paused and looked directly at Penelope. "Stay safe, Miss O'Brien. Town gets lively when the trail hands come in." With that, he placed his hat back on his head, nodded to Walter, and left the store. Penelope watched through the window as he mounted his black stallion and rode off, wondering when or if she would see him again. Over the next few weeks, Penelope settled into life in Abilene. Her work at the store kept her busy, and the Greens treated her almost like family. She maintained her room at the boarding house, though Mrs. Winters had hinted that there might be a small cottage available for rent soon. The idea of having a place of her own, however modest, filled Penelope with a tentative hope for the future. She made a few friends: Clara, the young schoolteacher; Benjamin, the apprentice at the blacksmith shop; and Rosalie, who worked at the small restaurant where Penelope sometimes treated herself to dinner on Sundays. None of them asked too many questions about her past, for which she was grateful. There had been no sign of Zachary Preston since that evening in the store. According to town gossip, he was still tracking the Comancheros, following their trail deeper into the territory. Penelope told herself that her occasional thoughts of him were merely curiosity, nothing more. One afternoon, as she was arranging a new shipment of fabric, the store door burst open and Sheriff Miller rushed in. "Walter, we need bandages, spirits, whatever medical supplies you've got. Doc Mitchell's out at the Peterson farm delivering a baby." "What's happened?" Walter asked, already moving to gather the requested items. "It's Zach. He's been shot. My deputies are bringing him in now." Penelope's heart constricted. "How bad is it?" she asked before she could stop herself. The sheriff gave her a quick glance. "Bad enough. Took one in the shoulder, another grazed his side, lost a lot of blood." "Where are they taking him?" Walter asked, handing over a bundle of supplies. "My office for now. Mary's there, she was a nurse during the war." "I'll close up and come help," Walter said. "I'll come too," Penelope offered impulsively. "I have experience with," she caught herself, "with tending to the ill." The sheriff looked doubtful, but Walter intervened. "Penelope's a godsend with a needle, Tom. If Zach needs stitching, you'll want her there." Miller nodded curtly. "Be quick about it," he said, and hurried out. Walter turned to Penelope. "You sure about this? It won't be pretty." "I'm sure," she replied, already untying her apron. She didn't examine too closely why she felt so compelled to help. When they reached the sheriff's office, chaos reigned. 2 deputies had just arrived with Zachary, who was semi-conscious and alarmingly pale. Blood soaked his shirt and trailed down his arm. Mary, the sheriff's wife, was already cutting away the fabric to expose his wounds. "Water's boiling on the stove," she directed without looking up. "Walter, I need that whiskey for disinfecting. Miss O'Brien, if you're here to help, wash up and come hold this compress while I check the exit wound." Penelope moved quickly, rolling up her sleeves and scrubbing her hands in the basin provided. As she approached the cot where Zachary lay, his eyes flickered open, focusing on her with difficulty. "Miss O'Brien," he whispered, his voice rough with pain, "didn't expect to see an angel just yet." "I'm no angel, Mr. Preston," she replied softly, pressing the compress to his shoulder as Mary had instructed. "And you're not going anywhere, not on my watch." A faint smile touched his lips before his eyes closed again. For the next 2 hours they worked to save him. The bullet in his shoulder had gone clean through, but the wound was deep and inflamed. The second bullet had carved a furrow along his ribs, painful but not life-threatening. After Mary cleaned both wounds, Penelope took over the stitching, her small, neat sutures closing the torn flesh with precision. Throughout the procedure, Zachary drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally muttering words that made little sense. Once he grabbed Penelope's wrist with surprising strength and said clearly, "They're headed north. Tell Miller, north to the old mission." "He's feverish," Mary said, bathing his forehead with cool water. "But that information might be important. Tom, did you hear?" The sheriff nodded grimly. "I'll send riders out at first light. If he's right, we might finally catch these bastards." By nightfall, Zachary's fever had broken and he was resting more comfortably. The doctor, having returned from the Peterson farm, examined him and pronounced that whoever had stitched him had done a damn fine job, pardon my French. "You should get some rest, Miss O'Brien," the doctor told Penelope, who had remained at Zachary's side. "You look dead on your feet." "I'll stay a bit longer," she said, her voice tired but determined, "in case he wakes and needs something." The doctor exchanged a knowing look with Walter but didn't argue. "Very well. Mary's in the back room if you need anything. I'll return in the morning." After everyone had left, Penelope sat in the chair beside Zachary's cot, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. In repose, with his face relaxed and vulnerable, he looked younger, perhaps 30 to her 24. The hardness that usually marked his expression was absent, replaced by an almost boyish quality. Without thinking, she reached out and brushed a lock of dark hair from his forehead. His eyes opened immediately, startling her. "Sorry," she whispered, withdrawing her hand. "I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't," he replied, his voice stronger than earlier. "Been awake a while, just enjoying the attention." There was a hint of teasing in his tone that she hadn't heard before. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. Well, now that you're properly awake, Mr. Preston, is there anything you need? Water. Something for the pain, Zach, he corrected. And yes to water, no to pain medicine. Need to keep my head clear. As she helped him take a few sips from a cup, he studied her face. Why are you here, Penelope? Not that I'm complaining, but nursing gunshot victims isn't exactly part of a shop girl's duties. The use of her first name seemed natural coming from him, though she'd never given him permission to use it. I have some experience with wounds, she admitted. My father was a doctor in St. Louis. It was more than she'd revealed to anyone in Abilene about her past. Something about Zachary made her want to share the truth, or at least parts of it. And yet you're working in a general store in Abilene, he observed. Long way from St. Louis. Yes, well, life takes unexpected turns. She busied herself straightening the blanket over him. That it does, he agreed softly. Thank you for helping, for staying. Their eyes met, and that same electric connection she'd felt on her first day in town sparked between them. This time, neither looked away immediately. You should rest, she finally said, breaking the moment. The doctor says you'll recover, but it will take time. Time I don't have, he muttered, frustration evident in his voice. Those raiders will be long gone by the time I'm back on my feet. Sheriff Miller is sending riders north, as you suggested. Zachary shook his head slightly. They won't find them without a tracker. These men know how to disappear. Then they'll have to wait until you're healed, she said firmly. You're no good to anyone dead, Zachary Preston. A genuine smile spread across his face, transforming his features. You're something else, Penelope O'Brien. Before she could respond, Mary entered from the back room. I thought I heard voices. How's our patient? Stubborn, Penelope replied, rising from her chair, but awake and coherent. Good, you go on home now, dear. I'll take over. Penelope hesitated, looking down at Zachary. Go, he said gently. You look exhausted, but come back tomorrow. It was a request, not a command, a vulnerability she sensed he rarely showed. I will, she promised. As she walked back to the boarding house under the star-filled Texas sky, Penelope tried to make sense of her feelings. She barely knew this man, and yet something about him called to her in a way no one ever had before. It was dangerous, she knew. She had come to Abilene to escape, to hide, to build a new life free from the shadows of her past. Becoming involved with anyone, especially someone as perceptive as Zachary Preston, risked exposing everything she had tried to leave behind. And yet, when morning came, her feet carried her back to the sheriff's office as surely as if they had a will of their own. Over the next week, as Zachary recovered, Penelope visited him daily, first at the sheriff's office, then at the small cabin on the edge of town where he was moved once he could walk with assistance. She brought books, played checkers with him, which he invariably won, and slowly, through their conversations, began to know the man behind the tracker's reputation. She learned that he had lost his mother when he was 10 and had been raised by his father in the mountains of Colorado. He had worked as a scout for the Army during the last years of the Indian Wars, a time he spoke of with visible regret. He had come to Texas 5 years ago, working first as a ranch hand, then as a guide for cattle drives, before his tracking skills brought him to the attention of the law in Abilene. In turn, she told him carefully edited versions of her own story, her father's medical practice, her mother's death from consumption when Penelope was 16, her love of literature. She omitted the circumstances of her father's death, the scandal that followed, and the real reason she had fled St. Louis. One evening, as the sun was setting over the plains, casting the cabin in a warm, golden glow, Zachary asked the question she had been dreading. Who are you running from, Penelope? She stiffened, the coffee cup in her hand suddenly feeling too heavy. What makes you think I'm running from anyone? He studied her with those perceptive eyes. "I recognize the signs. The way you check every room when you enter it, how you startle at unexpected noises, the careful way you phrase anything about your past." He paused. "I'm not judging. We've all got ghosts. I'm just wondering if yours might catch up with you someday." For a moment, she considered continuing the pretense. But sitting there in the fading light, with this man who had shown her nothing but respect and kindness, the weight of her secrets felt suddenly unbearable. "His name is Edward Blackburn," she said quietly, setting down her cup. "He was my father's business partner in St. Louis. After my father died, I discovered he had been embezzling from the practice for years. When I confronted him, She swallowed hard. "He threatened me. Said no one would believe me over him, that he'd have me committed if I spoke out. He was powerful, connected. And I was just a woman with no family, no protection." Zachary's expression darkened. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically, but he made it impossible for me to stay. Every door closed in my face. Every potential employer suddenly had no position available. Then I began receiving notes, warnings, so I left. Took what little money I had and headed west." She looked up at him. "I've been looking over my shoulder ever since." "Do you think he's still looking for you?" "I don't know. Sometimes I think I'm being foolish, that he's forgotten all about me. Other times—" She shivered despite the warm evening. "I see a stranger in town and my heart stops." Zachary reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was calloused but warm. "You're safe here, Penelope. I won't let anyone hurt you." The simple declaration, spoken with such certainty, brought tears to her eyes. How long had it been since someone had offered her protection? Since she had felt anything but completely alone? "Thank you," she whispered, not trusting her voice for more. They sat in silence as darkness fell, neither withdrawing their hand. 2 days later, Zachary was pronounced fit enough to return to light duties, though Doc Mitchell strictly forbade him from riding out on any tracking expeditions for at least another week. Sheriff Miller gladly put him to work reviewing reports and maps, trying to establish a pattern to the Comanchero raids. Penelope continued her work at the general store, but something had shifted between her and Zachary. Their connection had deepened, moving beyond the tentative friendship of previous weeks into something neither was quite ready to name. They found reasons to see each other throughout the day. Zachary needed supplies from the store. Penelope had a message to deliver to the sheriff's office. In the evenings, they often walked together along the quieter streets of Abilene, talking of books, dreams, and the future. He showed her how to identify the constellations that dotted the Texas sky. She taught him the few phrases of French her mother had passed down to her. The town noticed, of course. Abilene was too small for any developing relationship to go unremarked, especially one involving the mysterious new shopgirl and the respected tracker. Some, like the Greens, observed with approval. Others, particularly the young women who had set their caps at the handsome Zachary Preston, were less enthusiastic. Clara, the schoolteacher who had become one of Penelope's closest friends, warned her one Sunday after church. "Be careful with your heart, Penny. Zach Preston isn't known for staying in one place too long. And there's talk that once these raiders are caught, the Rangers might offer him a position up in Dallas." "We're just friends," Penelope protested, though the thought of Zachary leaving Abilene sent an unexpected pang through her chest. Clara gave her a knowing look. "If you say so, just guard yourself. Men like him, they're like wild horses. Sometimes they can be gentled, but often they just break hearts and ride away." Penelope considered her friend's words that night, as she sat on the small porch of the cottage she had recently rented. It was a tiny place, just one room with a curtained-off sleeping area, a stone fireplace, and a pump out back, but it was hers, and the independence it represented was precious to her. Was she foolish to allow herself to care for Zachary? She had come to Abilene to build a new life, one that didn't depend on anyone else. Getting involved with him or any man hadn't been part of her plan. And yet, when she was with him, she felt a sense of possibility that had been absent from her life for so long. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Zachary emerged from the darkness, his tall figure unmistakable in the moonlight. "Evening, Penelope," he said, removing his hat as he reached her porch. "Hope it's not too late for a visit." "Not at all," she replied, making room for him on the small bench. "I was just enjoying the night air." He sat beside her, his presence both comforting and exhilarating. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments before he spoke. "Got word today. The Rangers caught those Comancheros near the Red River. Seems the information I gave Miller was good after all." "That's wonderful news," she said sincerely. "The families who were raided can rest easier now." "Yes." He hesitated, then added, "The Rangers sent a man down to talk to me. Offered me a position with them out of Dallas." Penelope's heart sank, though she tried to keep her expression neutral. "That's quite an opportunity." "It is," he agreed, watching her carefully. "Good pay. Respect. The chance to make a difference across the whole state, not just around Abilene." "You should take it," she said, the words feeling like stones in her mouth. "It sounds perfect for you." Zachary was quiet for a long moment. "I told them no." She turned to look at him, surprise evident in her face. "You did? Why?" "Because my life is here now." His eyes held hers steadily. "Because I've found something in Abilene that matters more than any job." Her heart began to race. "And what might that be?" Instead of answering, he reached out and gently traced the line of her cheek with his fingertips. "You know, when I first saw you stepping off that stagecoach, something told me my life was about to change. I just didn't realize how much." She leaned slightly into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "Zachary, I'm not good with words, Penelope. Never have been. But I need you to know that I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you. And if you'll give me the chance, I'd like to show you what that could mean for both of us." Before she could respond, he leaned forward and kissed her gently at first, then with growing intensity as she responded. His arms encircled her, drawing her closer, and she felt as if something long dormant within her was awakening, unfurling like a flower reaching for the sun. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the day you stitched me up," he admitted with a small laugh. "Why did you wait so long?" she asked, smiling against his lips. "Wasn't sure you felt the same. Wasn't sure I deserved someone like you." She drew back slightly to look into his eyes. "And now?" "Now I'm still not sure I deserve you, but I'm selfish enough to want you anyway." She kissed him again, putting into the gesture all the feelings she wasn't yet ready to voice. When they parted, she said softly, "Stay with me tonight, just to talk," she added quickly. "I'm not ready for more." "Not yet," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'd like that." They moved inside, and Penelope lit the lamp while Zachary built up the fire against the evening chill. They sat together on her small sofa, talking late into the night about everything and nothing, childhood memories, favorite books, dreams that had seemed impossible until now. As the night deepened, Penelope found herself sharing more of her past, the full story of her father's death from a heart condition, the discovery of his partner's embezzlement, her growing fear as Edward Blackburn's threats escalated. "He was obsessed," she said quietly. "At first, I thought he just wanted to silence me about the missing money, but it became more than that. He started sending gifts, then showing up at my lodgings at all hours. When I rejected his advances, the threats began again, but worse this time. He said if he couldn't have me, no one would." Zachary's arm tightened around her shoulders. "If he ever shows his face in Abilene, he'll wish he hadn't," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "That's what I've been afraid of, that he might find me, that he might hurt not just me but anyone close to me." She looked up at him. "That's why I've kept people at a distance. Why I was reluctant to care for you." He asked, a hint of hope in his voice. She smiled ruefully. "I think it's clear that particular battle is lost. I do care for you, Zachary, more than I thought possible after so short a time." He kissed her forehead tenderly. "I'm glad to hear it, because I'm pretty certain I'm falling in love with you, Penelope O'Brien." The words sent a shiver of both joy and fear through her. "It's too soon," she protested weakly. "Maybe," he conceded, "but it doesn't make it any less true." They fell asleep there on the sofa, Penelope's head resting on Zachary's shoulder, his arm protectively around her. It was the first night in years that she slept without fear, without nightmares. The next morning they parted reluctantly, Zachary leaving early to avoid gossiping neighbors. But as he kissed her goodbye at the door, they both knew something fundamental had changed. They were no longer two solitary individuals adrift in the world, but two people who had found an unexpected harbor in each other. The following weeks were the happiest Penelope had known since before her father's death. She and Zachary spent every free moment together, their relationship deepening with each passing day. He taught her to ride, laughing with delight at her initial nervousness, and then with pride as she grew more confident in the saddle. She introduced him to the joys of Shakespeare, reading aloud to him on lazy Sunday afternoons. Though they were careful to maintain propriety in public, Abilene was still a small town with traditional values everyone knew they were courting. Walter and Martha Green gave their blessing without being asked, treating Zachary like the son they'd never had. Even Mrs. Winters at the boarding house, who had initially warned Penelope against that wild Preston boy, eventually conceded that they seemed well matched. "Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you," the older woman admitted one day when Penelope stopped by to deliver some fabric. "Like you hung the moon and stars. My Harold used to look at me that way, God rest his soul." Spring turned to early summer, bringing with it the dust and excitement of the cattle drives. Abilene bustled with activity as cowboys from the southern ranges brought their herds to the railroad for shipment east. The saloons did booming business, and the sheriff's office was kept busy breaking up fights and rounding up drunks. Zachary, now fully recovered from his wounds, divided his time between helping Miller keep order and taking on occasional tracking jobs for the local ranchers. He never stayed away from Abilene for more than a few days, always returning to Penelope with stories of his adventures and small gifts he found along the way: an unusual stone, a feather from a rare bird, wildflowers that reminded him of her eyes. One evening in late June, as they sat on the bank of Mud Creek watching the sunset, Zachary turned to her with an uncharacteristically serious expression. "There's something I need to ask you, Penelope." Her heart quickened. "What is it?" He took her hands in his eyes never leaving her face. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. Before you came to Abilene, I was just existing, moving from job to job, place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. But you've changed that. Changed me." She squeezed his hands encouragingly, too moved to speak. "I love you," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "I love your courage, your kindness, the way you see the good in people, even a rough frontiersman like me. I love the life we've started building together, and I want that life to continue. Forever." Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. From it, he produced a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. My father gave it to me before he died, said to save it for the woman who captured my heart the way my mother captured his. He took a deep breath. Penelope O'Brien, will you marry me? Tears welled in her eyes as joy swept through her. This was more than she had ever dared to hope for a man who loved her, who knew her past and accepted it, who offered her not just his heart but a future filled with promise. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Zachary Preston, I will marry you. His face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally broke apart, laughing and crying at the same time, Penelope rested her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. In that moment, she felt truly safe for the first time in years. When? She asked, looking up at him with shining eyes. As soon as possible, he replied, grinning. I'm not a patient man, in case you hadn't noticed, but we'll do it however you want. Big church wedding, small ceremony, whatever will make you happiest. Small, she decided immediately. Just our friends. In the church, with Reverend Davies officiating, and then perhaps a celebration at the Golden Spur. Walter and Martha would be heartbroken if we didn't have some kind of gathering. Done, he agreed, kissing her again. 2 weeks from Sunday, that'll give us time to arrange everything. As they walked back to town hand in hand, making plans for their future together, neither noticed the stagecoach arriving from the east, nor the well-dressed gentleman who descended from it, his cold eyes scanning the streets of Abilene with calculated interest. The next morning, Penelope practically floated into the general store, her happiness evident in her glowing face and bright smile. Martha noticed the ring immediately and enveloped her in a warm hug. About time that boy made an honest proposal. Walter and I were beginning to wonder if he'd ever work up the courage. Penelope laughed, returning the embrace. We're planning to marry in 2 weeks. Nothing elaborate, but we'd love for you and Walter to be there. Wild horses couldn't keep us away, dear. Oh, this calls for a celebration. Walter, break out that bottle of apple brandy you've been saving. Our Penelope's getting married. The day passed in a blur of congratulations as customers heard the news and offered their good wishes. Even Sheriff Miller stopped by, shaking his head with mock severity. Never thought I'd see the day Zach Preston would settle down. You must be some kind of miracle worker, Miss O'Brien. By closing time, Penelope was exhausted but happier than she could ever remember being. As she was helping Martha tidy up before heading home, the bell above the door jangled. Assuming it was a last-minute customer, she called out without looking up, I'm sorry, we're just closing. Hello, Penelope, it's been a long time. The blood froze in her veins at the sound of that voice, cultured, confident, and unmistakable. Slowly, she raised her head to see Edward Blackburn standing in the doorway, as elegantly dressed as ever, a thin smile on his handsome face. You've led me on quite a chase, my dear, he continued, stepping into the store as if he owned it. Sent Louis to Kansas City to Topeka and finally here to this charming little cow town. The way he said charming made it clear what he really thought of Abilene. Martha moved protectively to Penelope's side. Sir, as my assistant said, we're closed. I'll have to ask you to leave. Blackburn barely spared her a glance. This is a private matter between Miss O'Brien and myself. Perhaps you could give us a moment alone. I'll do no such thing, Martha declared, her voice firm. Penelope, do you know this man? Finding her voice at last, Penelope said, Yes. This is Edward Blackburn, my father's former business partner, and he's not welcome here. Despite her brave words, her hands trembled as she clutched the counter for support. Blackburn's smile never wavered. Still holding on to that ridiculous grudge, I see. Penelope, I've come a very long way to find you. The least you could do is hear me out." "I have nothing to say to you," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "Please leave, Mr. Blackburn. I have a new life here and you're not part of it." His eyes flicked to the ring on her finger and a shadow passed over his face. "So I see. Congratulations are in order, it seems. Who is the lucky man? Some local farmer? A shopkeeper, perhaps?" Before Penelope could answer, the door opened again and Zachary walked in. He took in the scene with one quick glance: Penelope's pale face, Martha's protective stance, the well-dressed stranger with the predatory smile. "Everything all right here, Penelope?" he asked, moving to stand beside her. "No," she said honestly, drawing strength from his presence. "Zachary, this is Edward Blackburn from St. Louis, the man I told you about." Understanding dawned in Zachary's eyes, followed immediately by a cold anger. He turned to face Blackburn, his stance subtly shifting to one that Penelope recognized from having seen him confront troublemakers in town: balanced, ready for anything. "Mr. Blackburn," Zachary said, his voice deceptively calm, "you're upsetting my fiancée. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Blackburn's eyebrows rose slightly. "Fiancée, my, Penelope, your tastes have certainly changed since St. Louis." He looked Zachary up and down with undisguised contempt. "A cowboy, really? Your father would be disappointed." Zachary took a step forward, but Penelope placed a restraining hand on his arm. "My father would be happy that I found someone who respects me," she said firmly. "Now, for the last time, please leave." "I'm afraid I can't do that," Blackburn replied, his voice hardening. "Not until we've settled our unfinished business. You see, Penelope, you left St. Louis with something that belongs to me." Confusion crossed her face. "What are you talking about? I took nothing but my own possessions." "The ledger," he said, watching her closely. "Your father's private ledger. The one that mysteriously disappeared after his death." Realization dawned. The small, leather-bound book she had found hidden in her father's desk after his funeral, the book that contained detailed records of all the practice's finances, including Blackburn's systematic embezzlement over the years. "I don't have it," she lied, thankful that the book was safely hidden in her cottage. Blackburn's smile turned cold. "I don't believe you. That ledger is the only thing preventing me from returning to my life in St. Louis. Once it's destroyed, there will be no evidence of any financial improprieties." "You mean your theft," Zachary said bluntly. "Penelope told me how you stole from her father for years." "A crude characterization of a complex business arrangement," Blackburn replied dismissively. "But yes, that ledger contains information that could be problematic for me if it fell into the wrong hands." "Like the hands of the St. Louis authorities," Martha suggested, her expression making it clear what she thought of him. Blackburn ignored her, keeping his attention on Penelope. "I'm prepared to be reasonable. Give me the ledger and I'll leave you to your rustic new life. Refuse, and I'll be forced to take more direct measures." Zachary's hand moved to the gun at his hip. "That sounded like a threat, Mr. Blackburn. Not wise in a town where threatening a lady can get you into serious trouble." "Not a threat," Blackburn replied smoothly. "Merely stating facts. I have resources, connections. I could make life very difficult for both of you. And I could put a bullet in you right now and save everyone a lot of trouble," Zachary countered, his patience clearly wearing thin. Penelope placed herself between them. "No one is shooting anyone. Mr. Blackburn is leaving, and we're going to inform Sheriff Miller of his presence in town." She turned to Blackburn. "I suggest you take the next stage out of Abilene. Whatever you think I have, it's not worth the trouble you'll find here." For a moment, it seemed as though Blackburn might argue further, but the determined expressions on all three faces apparently convinced him to reconsider. With a slight shrug, He adjusted his hat. Very well. But this isn't over, Penelope. I'll be staying at the hotel for a few days. When you reconsider, and you know where to find me. With a curt nod, he turned and left the store. As soon as he was gone, Penelope's knees buckled. Zachary caught her, guiding her to a chair. "Are you all right?" he asked, kneeling beside her, his face etched with concern. "I will be," she said, taking deep breaths to steady herself. "I just never thought I'd see him again. Especially not here, not now." "Do you really have this ledger he's after?" Martha asked, bringing Penelope a glass of water. Penelope nodded. "It's hidden in my cottage. I took it after my father died because I knew it contained proof of Blackburn's theft. I was going to take it to the authorities, but then his threats began, and I ran instead." "We need to tell Miller," Zachary said decisively. "Blackburn's not leaving Abilene without that ledger, threats or not." "I agree," Martha said. "Walter and I will lock up here. You two go straight to the sheriff's office." Sheriff Miller listened gravely as Penelope and Zachary explained the situation. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "So this Blackburn fella's been stealing from folks back in St. Louis, threatened you when you found out, and now he's tracked you all the way here to get the evidence." He shook his head. "Persistent cuss, I'll give him that." "He's dangerous," Zachary emphasized. "The kind of man who's used to getting what he wants, no matter the cost." Miller nodded. "I'll have a word with him, make it clear that we don't tolerate threats in Abilene. But legally, there's not much I can do unless he actually breaks the law here. His crimes in Missouri aren't my jurisdiction." "So we just wait for him to do something?" Penelope asked, frustration evident in her voice. "Not exactly," the sheriff replied. "I can keep an eye on him, make sure he knows he's being watched. In the meantime, I suggest you stay with the Greens or at Zach's place until this is resolved. Don't go back to your cottage alone." "I'll fetch the ledger," Zachary offered. "If that's what he's after, we should keep it safe." "Bring it here," Miller suggested. "I've got a safe in the back room. We'll lock it up until we figure out what to do." That night, Penelope stayed with Martha and Walter, too uneasy to remain in her isolated cottage. Zachary brought the ledger to the sheriff as planned, then spent the night in a chair on the Greens' front porch, his rifle across his knees, unwilling to leave Penelope unprotected. The next morning, Sheriff Miller paid a visit to the Abilene Hotel, where Blackburn was staying. The conversation, as Miller later reported, was civil but tense. "He claims he just wants what's rightfully his," Miller told them when he stopped by the store. "Says once he has the ledger, he'll leave Abilene and never bother Miss O'Brien again." "And you believe him?" Zachary asked skeptically. Miller shrugged. "Doesn't matter what I believe. I made it clear that if anything happens to either of you, he'll be the first person I come looking for. Also told him we've got the ledger locked up safe, so any ideas about breaking into Miss O'Brien's place would be wasted effort." Penelope frowned. "So now what? We can't keep living like this indefinitely." "I've been thinking about that," Zachary said slowly. "What if we contacted the authorities in St. Louis, sent them the ledger and a statement from Penelope about what Blackburn did?" Miller considered this. "Could work. Might take time, though. Law moves slow, especially across state lines." "Or," Martha interjected, having been listening from behind the counter, "you could just get married right away and leave town for a while, go on a wedding trip. By the time you get back, either the law will have caught up with Blackburn or he'll have given up and moved on." Zachary's face brightened at the suggestion. "That's not a bad idea. What do you think, Penelope? We were planning to marry in 2 weeks anyway. Why not do it sooner and take a trip to San Antonio or even New Orleans?" The thought of escaping Abilene, escaping Blackburn was tempting, but Penelope hesitated. "I don't want to run anymore, Zachary. I've been running for over a year now. If we leave, he wins again." "It's not running," Zachary argued gently. "It's buying time. We send the ledger and your statement to St. Louis before we go. By the time we return, Blackburn could be facing charges back east." She considered this, then slowly nodded. "All right. But I want to be married here in Abilene with our friends present. I won't let him take that from us." "Day after tomorrow, then," Zachary decided. "I'll speak to Reverend Davies this afternoon." For the next 2 days, preparations moved forward at a frantic pace. The wedding, originally planned as a small, simple affair, became even more modest due to the shortened timeline. But what it lacked in elaboration, it made up for in heartfelt support from the community. Martha and the other women of the town decorated the small church with wildflowers and ribbons. Clara offered the use of her mother's wedding dress, which fit Penelope with only minor alterations. Walter arranged for a celebration at the Golden Spur following the ceremony. Throughout the preparations, Zachary remained vigilant, never leaving Penelope alone. Sheriff Miller kept his deputies on alert, watching Blackburn's movements around town. The man made no further attempt to approach Penelope directly, but she often felt his eyes on her as she moved about Abilene, always accompanied by Zachary or Walter. On the morning of the wedding, Penelope woke early in the spare room at the Greens' house. Despite the circumstances that had hastened the day, she felt a sense of peace and certainty. By nightfall, she would be Zachary's wife. They would face whatever came next together. Martha helped her dress, arranging her hair in an elegant style adorned with small white flowers. As Penelope looked at her reflection in the mirror, she barely recognized the confident young woman who gazed back at her, so different from the frightened girl who had arrived in Abilene just months before. "You look beautiful, dear," Martha said, blinking back tears. "Zach won't know what hit him." "Thank you, Martha, for everything. You and Walter have been like family to me." The older woman hugged her carefully, mindful of the dress. "You are family now, and we couldn't be prouder." A soft knock at the door announced Walter's arrival to escort her to the church. He stopped in the doorway, his expression one of fatherly pride. "Well now, don't you look like a picture," he said, offering his arm. "Ready to get married, Miss O'Brien." "More than ready, Mr. Green," she replied with a smile. The small church was filled with friends and well-wishers when they arrived. Penelope paused at the entrance, her eyes immediately finding Zachary standing at the altar. He was dressed in a new black suit, his usually unruly hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. But it was the look in his eyes as he saw her that took her breath away, a mixture of awe, love, and fierce protectiveness that made her heart swell. As Walter led her down the aisle, Penelope was conscious only of Zachary and the future they were about to begin together. The troubles of the past few days, the shadow of Edward Blackburn, all seemed to fade into insignificance. Reverend Davies welcomed them with a warm smile, then began the ceremony. Penelope and Zachary had chosen traditional vows, but as they repeated the ancient promises, the words felt new and powerful, a sacred covenant between them. When it came time for the exchange of rings, Zachary's hands trembled slightly as he placed a simple gold band on her finger alongside his mother's engagement ring. Penelope, in turn, gave him a plain silver band that Walter had helped her select from the store's small collection of jewelry. "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Davies proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Zachary pulled her gently into his arms, his kiss a perfect blend of tenderness and passion. The church erupted in applause and cheers, led enthusiastically by Walter and Martha. As they turned to face their friends, now introduced as Mr. and Mrs. Zachary Preston, Penelope's gaze fell on a figure standing at the back of the church. Edward Blackburn watched them with an expression of cold fury before turning and walking out. Zachary followed her line of sight, his arm tightening around her waist. "Don't worry," he murmured. "He can't hurt us now." The celebration at the Golden Spur was everything they could have wished for: music, dancing, good food, and the warm companionship of friends. The saloon's owner had closed the establishment to regular customers for the afternoon, transforming the usually rowdy space into a festive wedding venue. As evening approached, Zachary and Penelope prepared to leave for the small house he had recently purchased on the outskirts of town, a wedding gift to his bride. They planned to spend 2 days there before departing for their wedding trip to San Antonio. Sheriff Miller approached them as they were saying their goodbyes. "I've got men watching Blackburn," he assured them quietly, "and I'll personally escort you to the stage tomorrow morning when you leave for San Antonio. Your statement and the ledger are on their way to St. Louis with today's mail." "Thank you, Tom," Zachary said, shaking his hand. "We appreciate everything you've done." The sheriff tipped his hat to Penelope. "Mrs. Preston, I wish you both all the happiness in the world, and don't worry about Blackburn, we'll handle him." As they rode in the small buggy Zachary had borrowed for the occasion, Penelope leaned against her husband's shoulder, content despite the lingering worry about Blackburn's presence in town. "What are you thinking?" Zachary asked, noticing her pensive expression. "That I never expected to find this kind of happiness," she admitted. "After my father died, after everything with Blackburn, I'd given up on the idea that I could ever have a normal life, let alone one filled with so much love." He kissed the top of her head, one hand steady on the reins. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Penelope Preston, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." The small house came into view, a neat, 2-room cabin with a wide front porch and a newly planted garden. Zachary had spent the past weeks preparing it for her, adding feminine touches that he thought she might like. Curtains at the windows, a braided rug by the hearth, a bookshelf filled with volumes he had collected from the general store and neighboring towns. As the buggy came to a stop, he jumped down and came around to lift her out, then swept her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Penelope laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Is this really necessary? I'm perfectly capable of walking." "It's tradition," he replied with a grin. "And I intend to do this properly." Inside, the cabin was warm and welcoming, with a fire already laid in the hearth and fresh flowers on the table. Martha's work, no doubt. Zachary set Penelope down gently, suddenly seeming unsure of himself. "It's not much compared to what you must have had in St. Louis," he said, watching her face anxiously. "But I thought—" She silenced him with a kiss. "It's perfect, Zachary, it's ours." Relief washed over his features. "I've been working on it whenever I could get away. Wanted to surprise you." "You succeeded," she said, moving further into the room to explore her new home. Every detail showed his thoughtfulness, from the comfortable-looking bed with its handmade quilt to the small writing desk positioned by the window to catch the morning light. As she turned back to him, emotion overwhelming her, there was a sudden pounding on the door. Zachary's hand moved instinctively to his gun as he stepped protectively in front of Penelope. "Preston, open up." It was one of Miller's deputies, his voice urgent. Zachary opened the door cautiously. "What is it, Jim?" "It's Blackburn," the deputy said breathlessly. "He's gone. Checked out of the hotel an hour ago. Sheriff sent me to warn you. He thinks Blackburn might be planning something." Penelope felt a chill run through her. "He wouldn't just leave," she said. "Not without the ledger." As if in response to her words, there was a crash from the back of the house, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Zachary reacted instantly, pushing Penelope toward the deputy. "Get her out of here," he ordered, drawing his gun and moving toward the source of the noise. "No." Penelope protested, refusing to be moved. "I'm not leaving you." Before either man could argue with her, Edward Blackburn appeared in the doorway that led to the bedroom, a pistol in his hand and a cold smile on his face. "How touching," he drawled, keeping his weapon trained on Zachary. The blushing bride refuses to abandon her groom. Loyalty is so rare these days, don't you think? The deputy had drawn his own gun, but Blackburn merely shook his head. "I wouldn't if I were you. Not unless you want to see how fast I can put a bullet in Preston here." "What do you want, Blackburn?" Zachary demanded, his voice level despite the tension evident in his stance. "Initially just the ledger. But now," Blackburn's smile widened, "now I think I want a bit more. Revenge, perhaps, for the inconvenience you've caused me. Do you have any idea what I've had to endure tracking this woman across half the country?" "That was your choice," Penelope said, finding her voice. "No one asked you to follow me." Blackburn's gaze shifted to her, his eyes cold. "You left me no choice, my dear. That ledger is the only evidence that could link me to those missing funds. Once it's destroyed, I can return to St. Louis a respected businessman, perhaps even take over your father's practice entirely." "That ledger's not here," the deputy said. "Sheriff Miller has it locked up at his office." A flicker of frustration crossed Blackburn's face, quickly replaced by calculation. "Then I suppose we'll have to pay the sheriff a visit, won't we, all of us together?" He gestured with the gun. "Outside, if you please. We'll take that buggy of yours, Preston." "This is madness," Zachary said. "Even if you get the ledger, you can't just shoot all of us and ride away. The whole town will be after you." "I'm aware of the complications," Blackburn replied coolly, "but I've come too far to turn back now. Move." Reluctantly, they began to file outside, Blackburn keeping his gun trained on them. The deputy went first, followed by Penelope, with Zachary bringing up the rear. As they stepped onto the porch, Blackburn momentarily shifted his attention to the buggy, perhaps assessing their planned route. In that split second, Zachary acted. He spun around, knocking Blackburn's arm upward just as the man pulled the trigger. The shot went wild, splintering the wooden beam above them. Zachary grappled with him, both men struggling for control of the weapon. "Run!" Zachary shouted to Penelope and the deputy. "Get help!" The deputy hesitated, then grabbed Penelope's arm, pulling her toward his horse. She resisted, unwilling to leave Zachary, but the deputy was insistent. "He can handle himself," he assured her. "Best help we can give is to get the sheriff." With one last agonized look at the two men fighting on the porch, Penelope allowed herself to be helped onto the horse. The deputy swung up behind her, and they galloped toward town. They found Sheriff Miller just leaving his office. One look at their faces told him everything he needed to know. "Blackburn?" he asked grimly. "At the house," Penelope gasped, her voice tight with fear. "He and Zachary were fighting when we left. He has a gun, Sheriff." Miller wasted no time. "Jim, get the rest of the boys. Mrs. Preston, you stay here." "I'm coming with you," she insisted, already turning back toward the deputy's horse. "It's too dangerous," Miller argued. "He's my husband," she said simply, her voice brooking no argument. Something in her expression must have convinced him, for after a brief hesitation he nodded. "Stay behind us then. And if I tell you to get clear, you do it. No questions." They rode hard back to the house, accompanied by two more deputies who had been nearby. As they approached, Penelope's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear anything else. The house appeared quiet, the front door still open as they had left it. Miller dismounted first, signaling for the others to spread out. "Preston," he called. "Zach, you in there for a moment," There was no response, and Penelope felt a wave of dread wash over her. Then, to her immense relief, Zachary appeared in the doorway, one hand pressed to a bleeding cut on his forehead but otherwise unharmed. "In here, Tom," he called. "It's over." Penelope didn't wait for permission. She slid from the horse and ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist. He held her tightly, his free hand stroking her hair. "It's all right," he murmured. "I'm all right." "Blackburn?" Miller asked as he cautiously entered the house, his gun still drawn. "In there," Zachary said, nodding toward the bedroom. "He's not going anywhere." Miller went to investigate, followed by one of the deputies. When they returned, the sheriff's expression was grim. "Dead?" Zachary asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. Miller nodded. "Looks like he hit his head on the corner of that heavy chest when you two were struggling. Broke his neck from the looks of it." Penelope closed her eyes, a complex mixture of emotions washing over her: relief that the threat was gone, sadness for the waste of a life, and guilt that she couldn't feel more sorrow for the man's death. "It was self-defense," Zachary told Miller, his arm still protectively around Penelope. "He was going to kill us all to get that ledger." "No one's saying otherwise," Miller assured him. "Given his threats and the fact that he broke into your home with a gun, I'd say it's a clear case of justified homicide. There'll be an inquest, of course, but it's just a formality." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The undertaker was summoned to remove Blackburn's body. Statements were taken from Zachary, Penelope, and the deputy who had witnessed the beginning of the confrontation. A telegram was sent to the authorities in St. Louis, informing them of Blackburn's death and the circumstances surrounding it. By the time everything was settled, it was well past midnight. Miller, seeing the exhaustion on their faces, suggested they stay in town for the night. "Martha's probably still up waiting for news," he said. "She'd be happy to have you both." But Zachary shook his head. "This is our home. We're not leaving it, not tonight of all nights." Miller seemed about to argue, then apparently thought better of it. "I'll have a deputy stay nearby, just in case." After everyone had gone, Zachary carefully locked and barred the door, then checked every window. Penelope watched him, noting the stiffness in his movements that suggested he was more injured than he had let on. "You're hurt," she said softly, approaching him as he finished his inspection. "Just bruised," he assured her, though he winced slightly as she touched his side. "Nothing that won't heal." She led him to a chair and began gently cleaning the cut on his forehead. "You could have been killed." "So could you," he countered, his eyes serious. "If anything had happened to you, Penelope." "But it didn't," she said firmly. "We're both alive, and Blackburn." "Blackburn can't hurt anyone anymore." He caught her hand, pressing it to his cheek. "I'm sorry our wedding day ended like this." "I'm not," she said, surprising him. "It's fitting, in a way, the last threat from my old life gone. Now we can truly begin our new one together." He pulled her onto his lap, cradling her against his chest. "I love you, Penelope Preston. And I love you, Zachary Preston, more than I ever thought possible." They sat there together for a long time, holding each other, until the tension of the day finally began to fade. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly across the Texas sky, marking the passage of their first night as husband and wife, not the peaceful beginning they had planned, but a beginning nonetheless. Later, as they lay together in their bed, Zachary's arms wrapped protectively around her, Penelope felt a sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in years, there was no fear, no need to look over her shoulder. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. "What are you thinking?" Zachary whispered, his breath warm against her ear. She turned in his arms to face him, tracing the strong line of his jaw with her fingertips. "I was thinking about the day we met, about how alone I felt, how afraid." "And now," he prompted. "Now I feel home," she said simply. Like I've finally found where I belong." He kissed her tenderly, then with growing passion, all the fear and tension of the day transmuting into a celebration of life and love. In each other's arms, they found the solace and joy that both had sought for so long. The inquest into Edward Blackburn's death was held 3 days later, and, as Miller had predicted, the verdict was justified homicide. With that final legal hurdle cleared, Zachary and Penelope were free to begin their life together without the shadow of the past hanging over them. They decided to postpone their trip to San Antonio, choosing instead to focus on establishing their home and planning for their future in Abilene. Zachary continued his work with Sheriff Miller, though he became more selective about the tracking jobs he accepted, preferring to stay closer to town. Penelope remained at the general store, her friendship with the Greens deepening into a familial bond that filled a void in her life. In the months that followed, they settled into a rhythm of domestic life that brought contentment to them both. Their small house gradually expanded as Zachary added a proper kitchen and a second bedroom, anticipating the family they hoped to have. Penelope planted a garden that flourished under her care, providing fresh vegetables for their table and flowers that brightened both their home and her heart. Word eventually came from St. Louis that, based on the evidence in Dr. O'Brien's ledger, authorities had uncovered a wider scheme of embezzlement that had victimized several other medical practices. Blackburn's estate was seized to repay some of the stolen funds, and Penelope received a small inheritance that had been tied up in litigation since her father's death. "What will you do with it?" Zachary asked when the banker presented her with the draft. She considered for a moment, then smiled. "I think my father would want it to be used for healing, perhaps a donation to help Doc Mitchell expand his practice. Abilene is growing and he could use an assistant." Zachary nodded approvingly. "He'd be proud of you, Penelope. Your father, I wish I could have known him." "He would have liked you," she said, leaning into his embrace. "He always said he could judge a man by the way he treated those who couldn't help him in return. By that measure, you would have been his favorite." Life in Abilene continued to evolve as the town grew with the expanding cattle trade. New businesses opened, more families arrived, and the community thrived. Through it all, Zachary and Penelope remained central figures, he as the respected lawman who kept the peace during the rowdy cattle season, she as the talented seamstress and bookkeeper whose skills were increasingly in demand. When, a year after their wedding, Penelope discovered she was expecting their first child, the news spread through town like wildfire. Gifts appeared on their doorstep: daily handmade blankets, tiny clothes, a beautifully crafted cradle from Benjamin the blacksmith. Martha appointed herself unofficial guardian of Penelope's health, insisting she rest more and eat better, fussing over her as if she were her own daughter. "Have you thought about names?" Clara asked one afternoon as they sat on Penelope's porch, enjoying the spring sunshine. "If it's a boy, William, after Zachary's father," Penelope replied, her hand resting on her gently swelling abdomen. "If it's a girl, Elizabeth, after my mother." "Beautiful names," Clara approved, "and fitting, honoring the past while looking to the future." "That's what we wanted," Penelope agreed. "A connection to where we came from, even as we build something new." When William Preston arrived on a crisp autumn morning in 1879, with a shock of dark hair like his father's and blue eyes that would eventually darken to match his mother's, he was welcomed not just by his parents, but by the entire community. Sheriff Miller declared an unofficial holiday. Walter closed the store early, and the Reverend Davies held a special service of thanksgiving. Zachary, who had faced down armed outlaws without flinching, was reduced to trembling awe as he held his son for the first time. "He's perfect," he whispered, tears shining in his eyes. Perfect, just like his mother. Motherhood brought Penelope a joy she had never imagined possible. William was a happy, healthy baby, quick to smile and slow to cry. As he grew from infant to toddler, his personality emerged curious, determined, and with a streak of independence that reminded everyone of his father. Zachary proved to be a devoted, if sometimes overly protective, father. He fashioned small wooden toys for William, taught him to identify animal tracks almost before he could walk, and told him stories of the mountains where he himself had grown up. But it was the gentle way he cared for his son, the patience with which he answered endless questions, the tenderness with which he bandaged skinned knees that most endeared him to Penelope. Their family expanded again 3 years later with the arrival of Rebecca, a fair-haired, spirited girl who had her father wrapped around her tiny finger from her first cry. And 2 years after that came Joseph, another son who shared his mother's thoughtful nature and his father's love of the outdoors. Through the years, as their children grew and Abilene continued to develop from a rough cattle town into a more established community, Zachary and Penelope's love deepened and matured. The passion that had drawn them together never diminished, but it was complemented now by a profound understanding and respect that comes only with shared experiences, the joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges of building a life together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Penelope with a trip to San Antonio, the journey they had planned but never taken after their wedding. Martha and Walter happily took charge of the children, promising all manner of spoiling in their parents' absence. As they traveled south by train, a luxury that had not been available a decade earlier, Penelope marveled at how much had changed. Abilene was now a proper city with brick buildings, replacing many of the original wooden structures. The wild frontier was steadily retreating before the advance of civilization. Even Zachary, once considered something of a wild man himself, was now a respected businessman as well as a lawman, having invested in several successful ventures around town. "What are you thinking?" Zachary asked, echoing the question that had become a familiar refrain between them over the years. Penelope smiled, taking his hand. "I was remembering something you once said to me a long time ago." "What's that?" "It was the first night we spent together, not as husband and wife, but that night on my sofa when we talked until dawn. I told you I'd never been loved, not really, not since my parents died. And you said, 'That changes today,'" he finished, his eyes warm with memory. "I meant it then and I mean it now. Every day with you, Penelope, is another day I get to show you what love really is." She leaned against him, contentment filling her heart. "You've kept your promise, Zachary Preston, and I've never regretted, not for one moment, that I believed you." As the train carried them towards San Antonio, and the brief respite from everyday life that awaited them there, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From the frightened young woman fleeing St. Louis to the confident wife and mother she had become, each step had led her to where she was always meant to be, beside this man who had shown her that love was not just a word or a fleeting emotion, but a choice made every day, a promise renewed with each sunrise. "I love you," she whispered, the words as fresh and true as the first time she had spoken them. "And I love you," he replied, gathering her close, "today and always." In the years to come, there would be more children, twins, Samuel and Sarah, born when William was 12, and eventually grandchildren, who would gather around to hear the story of how their grandfather, a rough and ready tracker, had fallen in love with their grandmother, a brave young woman from the East. The tale would be embellished in the telling, romanticized as all such stories are, but at its heart would remain the simple truth. That love, real love, can find you when you least expect it, can heal wounds you thought would never close, can build a life more beautiful than any you dared imagine. And when, many years later, a young woman would ask Penelope the secret to her long and happy marriage, she would smile and remember that moment in a small cottage in Abilene when she had whispered, "I've never been loved," and Zachary had replied with absolute certainty, "That changes today." It had, and every day since.